Hey, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time and want to thank everyone for taking the time this morning to join us for what is the fourth and final webinar that we're going to have for the 28 to 2031 call for projects. My name is Ryan Collins, and I am the short range planning manager leading this effort. Just for some context, this webinar is really kind of the last opportunity to get any questions, outstanding questions asked. The previous three webinars were a little more direct and focused on specific things. This particular webinar today is really going to be about just kind of the frequently asked questions that I've been receiving through the funding at campotexas.org email. I want to make sure that everybody has the same information that I'm providing everyone through that email address. And then just really there's some general themes that I wanted to address that have been addressed previously, but I want to address them again today just to reiterate certain things because a lot of the questions that I'm receiving, while they may already be found in the materials, the frequency of those questions make me feel like I need to address those again just to make sure everyone has the same information. So it's a shorter presentation today, definitely just kind of in a little more not hot hodgepodge, but it's just got a lot of random different areas. So it's going to be a little bit of everything today. But please, everyone's microphones are muted by default. Please raise your hand and you'll be unmuted and called on if you have any questions. There is a dedicated section at the very end for just general questions, but if you have questions on the particular materials that I'm covering at the time, please feel free to raise your hand. I'm a little tired this morning, sorry. So I always want to start with kind of some call for project considerations. These are just some general suggestions as you finalize your materials. And then I do want to revisit the project development process. I talked about this specifically in the readiness webinar as well as the in-person workshop at TxDOT. I do want to revisit that again just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. I'm going to go through a selection of frequently asked questions. I do want to revisit the guidance and resources again because there's a lot of information out there, and I just want to make sure that you're aware of what resources you have available. And at the very end, obviously, I'll open it for questions and an answer session. So again, we opened this on October 10th, 2025, and this is the final webinar session. We have about 2.5 weeks before the applications are due by 5 p.m. Central Time on January 30th, 2026. And so this is really kind of the last thing that we as staff are doing. We're going to start turning our attention to the review process, which kicks off very quickly in February, and we're going to have we have a team of individuals here that are ready to go to evaluate your applications. We are targeting June 8th, 2026 at this point. Obviously, the number of applications received and complexity of the products under review may impact that, but we have a robust team here. I think we can hit June 8th, 2026. It's going to be a sprint through that process. So call for project considerations, like the other webinars, I always like to start with just kind of some generalizations that I think are important to keep in the back of your mind as you go through this process. And the first one is pretty obvious, I think, but please do not wait till the last minute to start or submit your application. I'm assuming if you're on this call, I hope you've already started your application. You still have time to finish it, but it will be a heavy lift depending on what phase you are submitting for if you have not started your application yet. Please take the time to read through the materials and all of the resources. Most of the questions I'm receiving at this point are somewhere in the materials already, so please remember that we're handing out, distributing $350 odd million, a third of $1 billion. I think it warrants taking the time to read through the process and understand and take this process seriously because we are talking a lot of money, we're talking a lot of public funding, and we're accountable for it. Both the staff and the policy board are accountable for making sure that we're investing those funds wisely. And so I think the nature of the amount of funding that we're investing warrants like you take the time to really read those materials and understand this process. Make sure you've included all of your attachments. That's a no-brainer when you go through your application. Once it's submitted, it is submitted, so please make sure to double check all of your materials and your attachments. And one thing I do want to point out, and this is just kind of a general thing, is please make sure your application is clear and consistent throughout the attachments and your responses. That was something that I saw a lot in the last call where a lot of things were inconsistent or they just weren't clear. Remember that we as reviewers are reviewing this material for the first time. We are not familiar with your project the way you are. So I would highly recommend that you hand off your application to someone on your team or on your staff that has not read anything and ask them for their feedback to make sure that it is clear. Remember, we are strangers to this project, and so just make sure that everything is very, very clear. So if we're coming in this brand new, we understand exactly what is going on and that everything is consistent between your materials, because oftentimes, at least in the past, if things are inconsistent, it sows confusion. So that is just a basic kind of thing that I wanted to point out, and please keep that in mind as you go through this process. And kind of the other thing too is be realistic about your projects and try to eliminate as much optimism bias as possible. I know it is your job on your end to make your project as competitive as possible, and it's our job as a reviewer to go in there and to make sure that what you are saying about your project is actually accurate. That's where all the attachments and the verifications materials come into play. But be realistic about your project, because if you're, if you're not sure about something or you can't prove it, then it's not going to be, considered as part of your application. So, and I know everyone, it is your job to fight for your projects and to present it in the best light possible, but please do that realistically. And then finally, understand the requirements in the review process. This kind of goes back to that take the time to review the materials and the resources, particularly in the appendices of the guide. I think it's appendices like B and C in the guide for the project selection. I really talk about the kind of how we are going to approach things as a review team and the review process. And if you think the way we're thinking about your applications, you're going to submit a much better application. Know what we're looking for, know how we're going to approach it, because it is our job to uh, look at your applications critically and to try and pick it apart. Not necessarily pick it apart, but we're going to question everything in your application. And if it's not clear, consistent, and realistic, we're going to know that and we're going to mark that. So if you're thinking about it the way we're approaching it, you're going to be successful through this process. So those are just some generalizations. I'm going to revisit the project development process because I think a lot of the conversations I'm having, I'm under people do the project development process differently depending on where you're sitting, whether it's TxDOT or a local government sponsor or a transit agency. You're all developing your projects differently. I want to talk about how we approach it as Campo and how that bleeds into the readiness process. This is going to be repetitive if you're very familiar with these slides that I presented at the TxDOT workshop. But I think a lot of the questions that I've gotten in the last couple of weeks are really kind of coming back to this project development process. So again, I'm revisiting that. The way, the project development process is an iterative decision-making process with the outcomes of each phase is directly informing the next. So that's why we break off our awards into different phases, because you have to get the phase before complete before you can move into the next one, because the outcomes of that phase directly inform what the next phase looks like. And that's a really important piece to understand. And the readiness assessment will evaluate those projects. We're going to figure out where you are. You have to tell us where you are so that we can make sure that you've done everything you need to do to move into the next phase that you are requesting funding for. And again, this project development process may vary slightly, but they all have to demonstrate that it needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to be a defensible decision-making process every single step of the way. And one thing I always, as you're going through this process, again, high-level planning is the very beginning of the process where need is identified. That concept is typically included in a large-scale planning document. This could be kind of a region-wide. Our regional transportation plan is an example of this. And then city-wide transportation plans or county-wide transportation plans. That's where everything starts, where it's literally just a line on the map a very high level planning level estimate on the cost estimate, and you have limits. That's really all you have. And, it may have been taken out to the public, but not as a specific project. It's really just been out there as kind of a bulk portfolio of projects. So once a local government or agency decides to prioritize a project, you pull that off and then go into a project level planning. And this is really, I think, for me, if you skip this process, it's really going to hurt your application, the project level planning, for a couple of reasons. One, this is where a lot of the data that you need to demonstrate the benefit of a project is developed. This is where you talk to the public and engage them directly, the people whose right away you are going to be taking, the easements you're going to be taking from their yards, the businesses that are going to be impacted, the people that drive that roadway, for example. This is where you engage them directly early on in the process, and you also talk to the stakeholders that may impact that project. And that's where all of that happens at the project level process. This is where you look at the different alternatives. Obviously the high level planning will typically have an alternative kind of concept, like say widen from 2 to 4 lane, but you really look at the nuances of that alternative and develop all of the potential solutions, and you vet it. And that's the important thing, where that data comes from, where you are looking at the different options, the different impacts from the environmental perspective. You look at the cost, the right-of-way impacts, the community impacts. You look at all of that in project level planning, and then you make that defensible decision and decide what's the best option to move forward into engineering and further development. So that's why I wanted to spend a little time on the project level planning, because that is where your data is going to come from to demonstrate your benefit. And it's going to tell us that you have gone through a thorough process and that we're not going to invest in a concept that is not feasible or that is not supported by the public or is overly expensive. It's like you're basically vetting everything, so we know you know what you need to do, essentially. And that's where all that data is going to be coming from, is that project level planning. From there, I feel like you go through the next phase, which is the engineering, environmental clearance, and right-of-way and utilities. Those are pretty straightforward after you've decided what it is you're going to do. And I think project level planning, I'm going back to that because to me, we are a planning organization after all, but that is the most critical part of the process, I think, is figuring out how, like, what it is you need to do. The engineering is figuring out how to do it. And then at that point, and then you're moving into construction. So this is also kind of the just a way I think about it. You've got the evaluation process, which goes from high level to project level planning. Then you start developing it. And then right away in construction engineering, you're refining that idea and getting it ready for construction and implementation. And I'm spending time on this because this next slide I think may have been overlooked by a few people based on their questions. So I want to spend a little time talking about how that impacts readiness. So depending on where you are in the process, if you're asking for planning, everything in blue is what you're required to demonstrate. If you're asking for implementation, these are non-construction programs. You're responsible for everything here. Engineering, you're responsible for everything all the way through basic environmental analysis. Um, there's there's additional information on environmental analysis. We are expecting, if you're requesting engineering, that you have at least looked at the environmental constraints through the planning process. You don't have to have NEPA clearance, but we're looking for some level of environmental data. And the same for environmental clearance. And then construction, you are responsible for these 15 areas. In this next slide, I just want to highlight these particular areas. I feel like I wanted to clarify particularly if you were requesting anything past planning. I wanted to point out that you have to have all of your coordination and agreements. You've talked to your stakeholders, and public involvement also includes stakeholder involvement as well. So I want to make sure that you need to have your planning completed and you have had public engagement on your project if you were asking for engineering, and then some level of environmental analysis. And this is typically public involvement, environmental analysis, and planning and stakeholder coordination are all one and the same and handled in the planning phase. So please make sure that you've done a comprehensive planning effort if you were requesting anything beyond the planning phase. So that was that, talking about project development. I'm going to take an excerpt from the frequently asked questions. So there was the addendum that was released for the guide to project selection. with frequently asked questions. I have an excerpt for some of those. It's not all of them, but I wanted to spend some time with that so that everybody, based on the questions I've been receiving since that's been released. So a couple of practical updates when it comes to the application itself. When it comes to engineering, the drop-down box has been updated. Formerly, it was 10% up to 100%. We have added a 0% and a not applicable option for you to select. So if you're going through your application, again, especially for planning and engineering phase submittals, obviously you are not going to have any engineering done unless you've done a preliminary engineering report where you may have 10%. But either way, if it's not applicable or you have not completed any, you have that new drop-down box option. One other update I wanted to point out about the right-of-way utilities. If you do not require any right-of-way or utilities, or it's not part of the phase you're requesting, just please just put 0 in the right-of-way parcels required or acquired, and you can just put the application due date as a stand-in date because these are required fields. You will have to fill them out. So my recommendation is, I mean, obviously you will be putting 0 in all of those, and just put a generic date in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be the project call due date, but if you we'll know from it saying 0 and 0 in all of those fields that we need to ignore those fields. So just wanted to provide that update on the actual application itself. The engineering phase cost benefit analysis, one thing that was pointed out, I think Charlie Watts from Travis County pointed this out, is that the engineering phase cost benefit analysis would end up being skewed, and so we need to normalize that CBA process. We're going to be using the estimated federal share of the cost of the construction phase of a project that will in the CBA process for any project development phase requests that do not include construction. So planning, if you remember, does not have a cost benefit analysis, but engineering and environmental do. And what would happen if we ended up using because we use the federal request as the amount in the cost benefit calculation, it would skew it towards engineering. And so in order to normalize that with the construction costs, we're going to use your construction phase estimates that are typically available it'll be available in your backup documentation, assuming your planning level estimates. And we're going to assume the same cost level ratio, cost share ratio for your submitted phase. So if you are overmatching your engineering, we're going to assume an overmatch for your construction phase. Just to make sure we have an apples to apples comparison. So this is something that's going to happen on the back end, but I just wanted to make sure that that was very clear. This is to avoid engineering phase requests being having a ridiculously good cost to benefit ratio in comparison to construction, because we need to make sure that we're comparing the same things. Engineering requirements for the construction phase. Again, our recommendation is the 60% phase, and I talked a little bit about this during the project call, during the workshop, I believe. But for construction phase requests, the standard minimum of engineering and design completion that we are requesting is 60%, and you can see here from research, and this also tracks very clearly with our own research that we've done on previously selected projects, that 60% seems to hit that sweet spot where you've got all the information you need, and we've got all the information we need to have a fairly solid accuracy range for the construction estimate. So that's a critical milestone that we're looking for. I do want to point out that you can submit something below 60% if you believe that it demonstrates minimal risk of substantial design changes, cost estimate escalation, or schedule impacts. I will say that we're going to be looking for very specific things that are typically developed beyond the 30% schematic. And if they're not in there, these are typically the utility relocations requirements, the right-of-way delineations, things like that, your SUs, all of those things. If you have not done those in earlier plan sets, that's going to be an issue. So if you're missing critical high-risk information, the project's not going to be considered ready. But every project is unique. If you have those and you can demonstrate that low risk, because again, it's always a risk assessment on our end. If your plans demonstrate that all the necessary information to give us the confidence that it is a low risk. You can still submit it, but just know that we're going to be taking a critical eye to certain elements that are typically uh, provided later on in the engineering process. Foundational principles of scoping and cost estimate. I wanted to revisit this because I feel like that is kind of the beating heart of the readiness assessment for one thing. But I'm getting a ton of questions about the scoping and the cost estimates and requests for reviews. And so I wanted to spend a little more time going through these items. So the scope, again, is a detailed list of activities and deliverables to be completed. It breaks down the tasks as well as the subtasks. It ensures Campo that the phase can actually be completed. It demonstrates that the sponsor knows the requirements to complete the phase they are requesting funding for, and that methodology demonstrates a very clear process understanding. On the cost side, now these are very interrelated, but obviously the cost is a detailed list of costs associated with the project scope. I've had a lot of questions about the level of detail that is needed, so you should break down your costs and your scope as detailed as possible. We are not looking for a high level one line item scope saying, for example, engineering. Oftentimes people will estimate the engineering cost of a project based on the planning level, construction estimate, and then saying, oh, we're going to take 10% of that, and that's our engineering costs. And that's how, and considering that to be the methodology, we need a detailed list of everything you are doing in that engineering phase, all of the activities that you are doing, as well as the associated costs. To break down those costs of items, it should be an itemized list of the items and the deliverables associated with it. It should provide a very comprehensive picture of all the costs associated. The methodology demonstrates a very clear understanding of the costs it takes to get these individual items done. And it also tells us that those costs are not made up or guessed at. That is something we are looking for. We need to know where your costs are coming from. And if you don't tell us, or if it's just something very like, well, this is just a general estimate, that's not going to work. We need something very specific so that we know that you're not making up those costs and that they haven't been guessed at. Um, Again, and kind of this bold area is kind of the way I always think about these applications, especially the scope of the cost estimate in particular. These are investment proposals, and I would consider them purchase orders. Like the policy board is making an investment. They are buying something very specific, a very specific deliverable, and that's where this comes in. At the core of the process, it's about the Transportation Policy Board and staff knowing what they are paying for and ensuring that we are going to get what we pay for. Again, we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into transportation projects. Should not be a guessing game at any point or at any level. If the application does not demonstrate that clearly, we're not going to move it forward in the process, and we're not going to be recommending it because there should be no guesswork. When you're investing, say, for example, $100 million in a project, you need to know what you're getting. That is a lot of money, and it really comes down to that accountability. Um, and so just keep that in the back of your mind. There should be no guesswork involved with that. And I like to think of it, because this is public money, this is your money, this is my money as well. But if you're ordering a car, you're going to be, and spending a ton of money on a brand new car, and you order a specific, color, engine type, whatever, with all the details, and then you're going to be signing that purchase order and expecting that car to be the one that shows up on the lot when you go to pick it up. And so that's kind of the intent here. If something else completely, a different car shows up and they say, well, this is what you're getting, that's not going to be acceptable for you. And I think that's kind of the way we approach it here. Like, we want to make sure we're getting what we pay for, and protecting the policy board's investments. So I'm going to get off that kind of high level foundational principles there, but that's the way we think about it. And I hope you will think about your projects the same way. One thing I do want to point out, you may combine the scope and cost estimate documentation if you want to, because oftentimes they are very interrelated. The scope is everything that you are going to be doing, and then the cost is the cost of everything you're going to be doing. So they should be, they're two sides of the same coin. If you want to have everything in a single table, you are more than welcome to do that if it's appropriate for your project. We will be reviewing both of them side by side. So if you're saying you're doing one thing and then you've got a cost estimate that represents something very different, that's going to be an issue. So make sure that they are consistent. You have like task A through Z, and then we're going to have the costs for items A through Z. So they need to sync up and be very mindful of that, please. And then I just wanted to show some examples. I think a lot of people are like, what is the level of detail with the scoping? I talked about this just a second ago, but we're looking for a complete breakdown of the activities and associated deliverables in list format. I think in particular, the engineering phase is where a lot of people are asking questions like what level of detail. And we are still expecting a lot of, obviously with planning, it looks very similar to this where you have tasks and subtasks. But engineering as well, there is a defined deliverable, but there are a lot of things that go into that engineering process. And so we were looking for a line item scope for your engineering as well. And so this is, yeah, another example of the cost estimates. So again, we're looking at those tasks that you have detailed in your scope, and then we're expecting unit costs for all of those, and then your methodology and assumptions included in each. Now, there's more detailed slides in the readiness webinar, but I wanted to revisit those because I'm getting a lot of questions about that level of detail. Provide as much detail as possible because we are looking for that. And again, this is a binding contract / purchase order that the policy board is making, and they need to know what they are buying. And so please provide that detail. And it also helps us determine eligibility. Again, this is another example that was provided in a previous webinar, but I wanted to provide just kind of a high level estimate about those assumptions. And everything like that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but again, this is just a public engagement meeting, one meeting, and these are unit costs, and then tell us where those numbers came from. How did you come up with $5,000? Is the meeting venue, have you already selected it? Is that the average cost for a venue? Meeting materials, $1,000, what does that entail? Staffing, how many staff is that? What is their hourly rate? Those are the assumptions we're going to be looking for. And again, this is another example of a construction project. So construction is a little bit different where most of it is more you're buying physical infrastructure and the unit costs. But you may also have that there's always the mobilization effort, which is usually the staffing for the contractor is usually included. But this is an example of a cost estimate for a construction only type of project. So calculating the funding request, I think, is the other piece of the scoping and cost estimate. So I want to make sure everyone was on the same page when it came to knowing what to request, how the match works, how overmatch works. So using the example above, I've created a standard request based on that. So you have a cost estimate for the construction phase of $3.5 million. Working backwards from that, your funding request would be 2.8 million. This would be your federal funding request from the policy board with the local government matching it 700,000, and that would be 20 and 80-20 split. This is your standard request. If you were doing overmatch, that reduces the burden of the policy board and you get extra points for overmatching. So in this case, this local government is overmatching an additional 5%. And so you would calculate your request. The federal funding request would be 75% as opposed to 80% of the total project costs, with the local match being 20% of the federal funding, which is $660,000. And then the overmatch, which is local contribution on top of that to cover the additional 5%, is 220. So this is just an example of that. One thing I think a lot of the scopes and budgets that I've been sent for review have included additional items that are not being submitted for federal funding. So one thing I want to be, please don't include items in your budget or your scope that are not being requested as part of the federal funding request, unless it's clearly separated from the other items. So I had a case of a scope that was very detailed and included all the pre-construction activities. And my comment back to them was to please segregate that and make sure it's really good to have additional information, but just make sure it does not muddy up the scope that we're going to be reviewing for federal funding or the associated cost estimate. So if your cost estimate has other items in here, like say, I think one of some projects are going to have construction phase utility relocation, post-let utility relocation. That's not an eligible activity, and so please, if you're going to include but it is technically part of the construction phase, please separate that out. So I'm not looking at that thinking that that's part of this federal funding phase request. So just make sure that it's very, very clear. You can include items, but when we're looking at the scope and we're looking at the cost estimate, they need to be very tight when it comes to the federal funding request because we're going to be looking at the application, looking at your federal funding requests, and then we're immediately going to look over at your scope and your cost estimate to make sure that they match up. And if you're adding additional items in the cost estimate or scope, it's going to get very confusing very, very quickly. So just please, if you do include stuff, just make sure that it's very, very clearly separated from what is going to be based on your federal funding request. This is another example too. I know a lot of questions about the TxDOT oversight fee. Again, you can request that as part of your federal funding request. You'll be paying match on that, just like everything else that is federally funded. But I wanted to provide an example of that. So using the example from above, you've got your total project cost of 3.521. And so a 15% TxDOT fee, which is the fee we are recommending you put in your budget. It may be different, but 15% is the placeholder fee that we're requesting you use if you are requesting it. Please include that in your budget outside of the project total costs. And so at the end, you'll have your project total along with your fee, and then your standard request, if you are including the TxDOT fee, will look different because you're obviously adding that into the total project scope cost there. So this is just an example. Again, this is going to be posted online for your reference, but we're going to be looking for something that's very clear like this, that you are including that in. Hey, Paige, you have a question?
Sorry, I just to double check. So in the application, it has standard request and it has federal funding request and then local match requirement.
Mhm.
So if we are including the TxDOT fee in the local match and we like put that in our fee, does that go in that local match requirement fields? Or is that local match requirement fields strictly the 20%?
Yep,
Like, is it the 20% or is it the 20% plus the TxDOT fee?
yeah, no, that's a good question. So the local match is going to be whatever that local match requirement is. If you're including, so the TxDOT fee, if you were paying for that locally, that's not going to be included in your federal funding request or the local match or the overmatch. Actually, it's not going to be included anywhere in that funding request form in the application. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes,
Because
thank
it's
you.
something, it's kind of separate. Like the funding request is really it's just going to be related to what's in the standard request. Either one of these two fields, if it's outside, it's considered on top of everything else. And so we're focused on the federal funding request, and you can provide that information in your cost estimate budget as a separate line item and indicate that it's going to be paid for by the local government. But I don't want it to muddy up what that federal funding request is, and it's not considered part of the match either. So yeah, did that clarify everything? I just wanted to double check. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, it did.
Oh yeah, no, and I
Thank
wasn't very direct. Sorry. I was looking back at my
you.
example, so thank you. Uh,
Hey
Daniil?
Ryan,
Hey,
yeah,
Dan.
quick question. To better budget, when do we anticipate to actually spend this local match? In 2026 fiscal year or 2027? Like this fiscal year, are we only expected to basically pay that TxDOT fee, or we also will be spending some of the local match?
So the TxDOT fee is paid for when you execute the advanced funding agreement. So that's an upfront, it's basically a deposit because what it does is it pays for the oversight. And then anything that they don't use, you get reimbursed when you close out the project. But it's really a deposit that's paid for upfront. It's a separate fee. It's not considered part of the local match or anything like that. The local match is paid for over time. So After you execute your advanced funding agreement and you start billing against that project, you slowly start paying the local match. So basically, like you submit an invoice for $100, you're going to get $80, an $80 reimbursement back. So you spent 20, that's your 20% local match on that particular billing, and it's paid for over the successive billings until you close out the project. Does that make sense?
It does. So not after it's like not after we, let's say, win the grant, which will not happen until later this
Mhm.
fiscal year.
Yeah, so and the earliest fiscal year we're programming projects is going to be fiscal year 28, which starts in October 2027. So in about a year and a half, that's the earliest we'll be able to program. There is a possibility for some funds to be programmed in fiscal year 27, but that's going to be a very tight window with the advanced funding agreement. But yeah, so nothing for the next year and a half, I guess, from a fiscal year perspective. But until you sign that advanced funding agreement, you're not going to be spending any money other than that oversight fee. So
Understood. Thank you.
thanks. Thanks, Abbas. Make sure you can.
Hey, Ryan. My question is, can force account labor or in-house labor be included as a local match?
No, we're not doing in-kind contributions or staff contributions. It's a cash match.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Fernando.
Hey Ryan. Uh Quick question on the overmatch. If our project has it's split between non campo contribution and non-campo contributions, meaning the non-campo contributions would be more of the utility side. Um so like we're doing water, wastewater improvements as well. Would that be considered as part of the overmatch? Because overall the total project would be more
Mhm.
uh rather than just splitting up to what Campo will be funding. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no,
Like if
yeah, no, and that's a good question. And actually, I think I have a slide coming up on this. But so overmatch has to be is reducing the burden of the policy board, and so it has to be related to the eligible activities that you're submitting. So if it's something that's like a utility relocation that's not an eligible phase, that's not going to be considered overmatch. It's really about the federal funding amount, like the phase that's getting the federal funding and the activities that are receiving the federal funding. So really, it's reducing the burden of the policy board is what the overmatch. So it's very closely related to the eligible funding activity. So any money that's spent on non-eligible activities or wasn't submitted as part of the original request that's being submitted to Campo is not going to be considered. So that's it's a distinction I want to be very, very clear about because that like if you spend there's other elements that you're gonna have to spend money on that you may not be submitting like as you're pointing out, Fernando, that's a wastewater utility relocation or if post-let utility relocations or funding that's been spent on project development previously or will continue to be spent leading up to the construction phase. None of that is going to count. The overmatch is very specific to the federal funding request and the eligible activities that you're submitting for federal funding.
gotcha. And then related to that is when we have a scope, when we do the scope schedule budget, those items are I'm programming those in
Mhm.
as part of the project. Does Campo want to see those items in that? Because it the way I'm seeing it is this is the total project contribution, well, not contribution, but total project cost.
Yeah.
Um, does Campo want to see that?
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier is that, having that information is important from a, overall project review perspective. If you're putting it in the budget and the cost estimate and everything like that, just be very, very clear that that's not part of the federal funding request because I think
Gotcha.
in the past I've had instances where it was very similar where like a very comprehensive project with a lot of moving parts and you're only asking for federal funding for a specific piece of it. It gets very confusing very quickly if it's like not clear like which pieces of the federal piece and which is y'all are paying for. So just make sure it's very, very clear. Like I think it's important, especially in the schedule, because that will impact obviously when we fund it for construction or program it. If you've got these other activities that are gonna have a significant impact. So we do need that information. Just make sure it's very clear what's going to be federalized and what isn't, and what you're doing with your under your own steam. So that's a good question.
Perfect.
So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Right, thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, I see y'all have a contingency on this example here for a construction project.
Yeah.
That's pretty standard, but can we use contingency for an engineering project?
Yeah, if it's appropriate for your project, then yes. I mean, you'll have to justify what rate you're using, and obviously, obviously contingency shrinks the closer you get. But yeah, I mean, you can include what you think you need in the engineering request. Just make sure you're justifying that contingency. I'm
Right,
not sure
thank
how
you.
many engineering projects I've seen with contingency on it. This is normally for construction, but if you think you need it and you can justify it, you can include it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, Ben.
Thank you. On the inflation in future year, I understand the guidance documentation asks that we submit things with current costs.
Yes.
Just curious if we might be able to, again, for internal planning purposes, get the text dot rate for future years. Just so if we know, our local match is going to have to be more than what we're currently actually.
Yeah,
Excuse me,
no,
asking for.
absolutely. So the current rate is 4% inflation per year. So use that rate. That is, I do believe, still the current text dot rate. We're double checking those numbers because inflation has gone down significantly. Obviously, we had a very random 21 and 22 where everything spiked, but according to the construction cost index that FHWA puts out, as well as TxDOT, I believe 4% is still an accurate rate. So use that for your internal planning purposes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, good morning, Charmaine. Hey, Charmaine, you can unmute if you're ready to ask a
Sorry.
question.
Sorry. So I think my question is for the project schedule. It was
Mm-hmm.
before this, but the fiscal year requested, do we put the fiscal year when we start the project, or is that when we when we complete the project, or when we're gonna start procuring for the project?
Good question. So it's when you start the project. So we program it, and that fiscal year is tied to your advanced funding agreement and your federal project authorization agreement. So that once you kick that off, the funding's programmed and you spend it down for years afterwards, typically. But that fiscal year is when we're looking to program it, particularly in the transportation improvement program. So that fiscal year is basically the start date of the project.
Start date. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, thanks. Morning, Lauren.
Good morning, Ryan. I had a quick question related to utilities. I understand utility relocation isn't something that's funded by Campo. If you're applying for engineering and design funding, is utility identification and coordination something you can apply for, or does that anything related to utilities need to be not in the request?
Yeah, good question, actually. And so, yes, you can include utility identification and everything in your engineering request. We just don't pay for the physical relocation of the assets or purchasing of right of way, but you absolutely should include that in engineering, actually.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's a good question. Hey, good morning, Jana.
Good morning. If we have an overmatch that is 4.4%, I know that there's a drop down box and the options are 0% and 5%. Is that okay that we select the 5%?
I mean, we're going to round it, and 4.4 will go down to 4.
Okay, well, because four is not, there's no option for, it goes in chunks of five. It's 0%, 5%, 10%.
Oh, gotcha. I was thinking, yeah, because the percentage points. Yeah, so I mean, in that case, yeah, if it's a 5%, then we'd be rounding up in that case.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
yeah.
And then on an unrelated note, is it okay if a consultant submits the application, or does it have to be the project sponsor?
A consultant's fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Sam. Hey, Sam, you can unmute now.
Thanks. Sorry, I thought you would. Morning. Going back to the 15% state oversight, I'm assuming, and you can clarify if the assumption is correct, that that would also apply to planning projects for like the initiation of a safe routes to school program, correct? Or would that design and construction?
No, it's all projects. And 50% again, obviously is a high number. We just want to make sure that's included, and then obviously that will be negotiated with TxDOT once they review the project and the kind of that oversight requirements there. And that will likely be lower, but 15%, we'd rather go over than under. But yeah, that's required of all projects. I'd say for planning projects, it's typically around 5% to 10%. But yeah, again, that's a TxDOT discretion there. I wouldn't expect any of them to be over 15%, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, Charmaine. I think you should be able to still unmute.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. So I have another question. So for the board resolution, do we have to reflect the direct costs on there, or is that just the direct cost is just going to be reflected on the breakdown when we're attaching those documents into that section?
Good. So like so you can do it both ways. I've seen it where it's just kind of general. I would recommend including the direct, like the costs, because one thing with the board resolutions that we're looking for is that knowing that the board knows how much they're going to have to spend on a particular project. I think that's important.
Mhm.
And I would absolutely include it because they will be on the hook for that,
Okay.
one way or the other, as long as the language makes sure they're on the hook for it. But yeah, I think that's an important thing to understand, is that, yeah, there should be no surprises, because we've had instances in the past where we've had board resolutions where, yeah, we've got the funding, and then when the bill comes due, it's like, oh, maybe not. So one thing about the resolutions, I'd be very as specific as possible in your resolutions, and also identify the sources of funding where the match and the costs are going to come from, because that helps people think about, if you get selected, that bill is going to come due and you're going to have to get that money from somewhere. We're looking for that information in the resolutions, and the tighter it is, the better. But I think it is also good for your own boards. It sets them up for the expectations very clearly. So yeah, but that's a good question. And that's just kind of my recommendations there. So hopefully that clarifies that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, good morning, Kate.
Morning. Thank you so much. I just had our city do the resolutions yesterday, and according to the AFA template that was recommended for the text dot, it said don't put numbers on there in case
Okay.
increases happen. So I hope that's going to be acceptable.
Yeah, no, if that's, it's kind of a matter of perspective, I think. And yeah, I guess because, and I can get where knowing where TxDOT's, their side of it is that if the funding amounts change, then you have to go back and get that resolution updated, which causes a lot of delays. And so there is that piece of it as well. And I'm assuming that's what that is in there for. So I think both are acceptable. I think the main thing is that, you know, the board knows how much they're going to be on the hook for should the project be awarded. Your particular boards or councils or whatever, not our policy board in this case. But yeah, I think that's just an important thing to add. But or have a clause in there that these numbers will change. They probably will. But yeah, I think either way is fine. So.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Nat.
Hey, good morning, Ryan. Thanks for all the information. If we have a project that is over $50 million, TxDOT is suggesting that there may be a requirement for value engineering that project. Is that in any way accounted for in the scoring process as it relates to projects asking for construction? Or is that a process that happens later down the line after the award is made?
That's a good question. I've never heard. I know that's an internal thing for on-system projects, I believe.
Yeah.
That's not accounted for in our process. You can include that in like your construction request, if they're going to require that, and that, obviously has an associated cost with it. That's a interesting question.
Yeah, not to share family business, but Georgetown is going for an on-system project.
Mhm.
And we're trying to coordinate as best we can with TxDOT and appreciate all their guidance and recommendations. Obviously, we can't do that value engineering before we submit, but we are going for a construction award. And our project is nearing the $50 million mark, but just in the back and forth with TxDOT, they said it may require that. And obviously, if there's a cost, and I think obviously there would be some, but if going forward a cost estimate and there is an award, then I think the AFA lays out that the sponsor is responsible for any cost overruns. So I would
Mhm.
assume that the burden would not be on the board or Campo or FHWA to undertake that cost
Yeah, no,
to the board, but
Mhm.
opinion, and I just kind of wanted to. Campo
Yeah.
wasn't sponsors who haven't undergone that additional engineering effort.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So you're kind of breaking up a little bit, but I think I got the most of what you said. Um, So if they do require value engineering, you can include that in your request. So we can pay for that if you include it in your request, and we understand that that's a cost that's going to be required. It's very similar to if you have construction projects that you have not been designing to federal standards, and you're going to have to add some additional elements to bring it up to TxDOT standards and federal standards. You can include that limited construction engineering. And those costs. So if you're like, say you're like 60% design or like 80% design, whatever, you can add those costs in there. I would lump value engineering in there as well. If that is an expectation and you're going to have to do it, you can request that to be part of the reimbursement in your request. So you can be requesting construction with value engineering as well. You'll just have to figure out how much that's going to cost and all that and scope that in there. But yeah, so. Interesting question. I haven't heard that one before, so thanks for bringing that up. Because I did see something about that in the project development manual a while back. I know TxDOT requires that, but yeah, if there were, and because yours is on system, I'm not sure if that would kick in for off-system products. But if it is something, it is a good thing to do, I think. So something to consider. Hey, Sarah.
Hey Ryan, good morning. Just clarification question. I think I actually answered it, but if we're applying for transportation alternatives, do you want that listed in the project title, or do y'all kind of deduce that based on the whole application?
We'll deduce that on the whole application. So because you're also eligible for STBG and carbon reduction funding if you're
Perfect.
eligible for TASA. So you're actually technically eligible for all three funding sources. So what we'll do, we do our full score and rank, and then going down, we'll look at the scopes, and then we'll match it up with the first available funding source as we have it available as we go down that list. So you don't need to worry about that on our end, on your end. As long as it's eligible for one of the three programs, you're going to be okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for these questions. So I don't have many more slides, but I just wanted to hit a few more things. Functional classification, I think, is one thing. know your functional classification requirements. You're obviously having to put that into your application. That does affect federal funding eligibility. The official functional classification is maintained by TxDOT, and you can look it up on the statewide planning map. The project readiness workshop, TxDOT presented on this a little more in depth and linked materials with those slides for additional information. So if you have questions about your functional classification, please refer to that workshop slide deck and go to the statewide planning map. That will impact your eligibility. So just make sure that that's very clear. I think I did receive a question, like if your local plan function classifies something one way or another, that's important, but it doesn't, the official functional classification for federal funding in these programs is maintained by TxDOT. Local match considerations. This kind of goes back to the question, I think, Fernando, that you had asked earlier, that the match is the local funding that's allocated to the phase of the project that's awarded federal funding and is directly tied to the federal funding reimbursement process. Again, local funding for earlier project development or non-eligible work concurrent with the requested phase, such as post-let utility relocation, is not considered part of the match or in-kind contribution. So I just wanted to revisit that, but that we were talking about that earlier. Procurement process. One thing I do want to point out is that all of these projects will have to undergo a TxDOT approved a TxDOT approved procurement process that meets state and federal standards. TxDOT approves those processes to make sure they meet federal standards. This approval is required before going out for procurement for any federally funded project. I do want to point out, I know we have a lot of sponsors that have either active contracts or like on-call consultants that are already procured under a already procured and could potentially be used for the activities. So the TxDOT Austin District can review the process that was utilized to procure any active contracts, but that's a case-by-case basis and to determine if the federal funding can be used for that existing contract. So that's just basically a case-by-case basis. I would not assume that to be the case. You can reach out to TxDOT for clarification. But my base assumption would be that a new procurement will be required and prepare your applications accordingly. So I would just assume that unless you hear otherwise from TxDOT. Regional significance is one thing I do want to kind of take a touch back to regional significance. We have a very clear definition of regional significance in our 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. That is, there's a adopted regional definition by the policy board that's on page 53. Please consider that when you're submitting. We're expecting a very competitive project call, and this process will focus on the most regional projects in the region. So I would just look at that definition and think about your submittal that way, because the process will, the more regionally significant a project is, the higher it's going to float up to the top, all else notwithstanding. So I just wanted to point that out. Our resources there. If you're looking for that definition, go to page 53 in the Regional Transportation Plan. Resolution submission. So I got this question a lot, and so this is the one time I've get an extension of basically. So resolutions for governing body may be submitted after the application due date, but we do have certain restrictions and acceptance requirements in place. Because I know, and I feel like a lot of people have asked that, it takes forever to get these things on the council agenda, get those approvals. There's a long process. I get that. Part of me is like, well, we've been open for 5 months, but I get that, some of these things do take a lot of time. So I wanted to offer a little bit of flexibility when it comes to resolutions only. So if you plan on doing this and submitting your resolution after the due date, your application has to include that draft resolution and agenda and have the scheduled date for consideration. That draft resolution needs to be the exact same one that you submit later on, minus the signatures and the approval signatures, essentially. So we know exactly what we're going to get once you submit it in later on. The signed resolution has to be submitted through the funding@campotexas.org email address by February 20th, 2026. Because we'll still be very early on in the readiness review process. We'll have your draft resolution. We'll be able to review everything, all the language. It's just going to be missing that signature. And so when you send it in, we'll put it in your project file with the signatures and we can confirm that. Until we have a signed resolution, as we go through the readiness process, basically your coordination and your financial requirements will not have been met. And if you do not get that resolution submitted by February 20th, you're not going to meet the requirements, will not be considered ready. Kathy, you have a question? Should be able to unmute
Yes,
now.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I'm just wondering, we're under the understanding that you have a resolution from the sponsor's body, but you also need resolutions of concurrence if you are affecting other people's jurisdictions.
Mhm.
And I don't know how we would necessarily have an agenda from all these concurrence people to be able to submit. We could submit their intent, that they have said they will do it, but how do we accomplish? You said we had to have the draft resolution and the agenda showing when it's going to be considered. How would that be accomplished?
I mean, if you can't get that, you can provide a commitment or an email saying that it's going to be there. Because I know sometimes, like the agenda is not prepared up until like 3 days before the meeting actually happens. The whole point of the agenda is to say that to show us that you're going through the process and it's going to be on that agenda and it's going to happen. It's a confirmation issue. So if you can get that accomplished some other way without the draft agenda, if you don't have it available, then that's fine. We just need to know, like, I know in some cases there's like a submittal form that you submit to put something on an agenda. You can provide that. Basically, we just want to know you're actually going through that process and it's going to happen. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a good clarification there. So. Okay, so I'm going to go through safety information. Hang on just a second. So safety information and regional averages. So in the addendum, you're going to see this table for regional crash rates. So especially if you're submitting a roadway project, there is a regional crash rate. We want to look at your project and we compare it to the regional crash rate for that facility type. And I want to be clear that we're looking at severe crash rates. This is K&A or, killed and likely severe injury. So those are the numbers. This is the table that we're going to use to compare. So it's based off of the location of it, if it's a rural or urban, and then the severe crash rate per VMT by facility type, and then by the county. So if you're submitting a roadway project, you're going to need to figure out what your crash rate is on your facility. The way to do that is you're going to need to know your VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and the number of severe crashes that have occurred on that facility from years 2022, 23, and 2024. And here's the formula for that to figure out what your crash rate is to compare it to the crash rate on this table. So how do you get that information? Well, the TxDOT roadway inventory is a comprehensive spreadsheet. It's linked here. It is linked in the addendum as well. Go to this TxDOT roadway inventory, and it has basically every facility, function classified facility. It's got all the information you need there. TxDOT's CRIS system is where you get your crash rates. We also have a CRIS dashboard that's Campo hosted. It's a dashboard that actually pulls data directly from CRIS. It's a little more user-friendly if you're looking for something like that. And then we also have our regional safety action plan, which provides a region-wide safety analysis. It's got hotspot identifications and other metrics that can help support you identifying the safety issues and ways to address the problem in there. So I just wanted to point that out. This is the official table for regional crash rates that we're going to be using to compare against your projects, but you're going to need to be providing your regional project or your project specific crash rate. Transportation planning requests. This came up at the policy board on Monday, but currently there is no preset limit to the number of transportation projects being awarded. And again, at this point, the policy is still all transportation planning project awards will be partnerships with Campo. That has not changed. That was brought up at our policy board and may be a discussion in the next few months. But as of right now, the planning projects will be partnerships with Campo. Guidance and resources. I'm nearing the end of this presentation. And so I just wanted to point out all of the resources. If you're not familiar with them, please get familiar with them. I would say the guide to selection of regional transportation projects and the addendum are the two that you need to read, if anything else. And hopefully you're very familiar with these and this information is old news. I really, hopefully that is the case, but I just want to point out that basically everything you need should be in any of these information sessions or in the guide. Please take the time to read through those materials. Everything you need essentially is in these materials. I do want to point out that TxDOT also has a lot of really good resources. I've been a huge fan of the project development process manual. This is kind of an A to Z how TxDOT develops projects. You may do things a little bit differently, but I think it is a great resource and a good barometer to how you're developing your own projects. And again, the local government office has a lot of materials out there. These will be the materials that you'll be using and getting very familiar with if your project is selected. This is what's going to manage your that process. One thing I'm looking at it right now, and I did not address it in this, is the local government preliminary scheduling tool. That is a tool that TxDOT has just come out with that we provided to everyone. I wanted to point out it doesn't really do well for non-construction projects. I think it's mainly for construction only projects and scheduling that. I've got a lot of questions. Do we have to use it? So I want to be very clear. It is not required that you use this scheduling tool. If it doesn't fit your project or doesn't provide an accurate project schedule, you do not have to use it. We want the most accurate schedule possible. It is a good reference, and I would recommend that you use it so you can, if possible. But if it doesn't fit, you don't have to use it. If it's not appropriate for your project type or it's not providing what you think is an accurate schedule. And you can also submit both. You can fill it out and submit that, but also submit your own if you want. There is flexibility there is what I'm trying to get at. It is not required, but it is something we will be using internally. I know TxDOT is going to be using it to compare to your project schedules and to make sure that it's there. So use it if possible, use it if it's appropriate, and use your own if that's more appropriate. Just want to point that out. FHWA also has some really good resources. Federal Aid Essentials for Local Public Agencies has a short little 4-minute videos regarding the process that you're going to have to go through, federal requirements such as Buy America and NEPA and all of those things, negotiation. You can see here hiring a consultant using competitive negotiation procedures is a screenshot here. The federal procurement process. They're very short and very digestible. I would recommend you check those out if you haven't. And then there's a lot of project delivery toolboxes, and then the transportation planning process. FHWA has a lot of good resources as well. Obviously, they are much broader than TxDOT's because they're for the entire nation, but I would highly recommend you go use those materials. And so wrapping up here, I just wanted to go through if there are any final questions or answers. Now's the time to ask. And just want to say thank y'all very much for all the time. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, so I just want to say thank y'all for taking the time to participate. So, Charmaine, hey.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you for taking the time to present these sessions with us. It's very helpful. I do have 2 questions regarding the application. So the first one, for the sponsor LGPP certification, if we registered to take the class, do we just leave the select date or the date field and just put the individual's name on there?
If you could put the anticipated date field of when, so if you're scheduled for it, put the second date of that class on there, because that'll be when you'll receive that certification, and provide the email, like a screenshot of the email or a PDF of it, confirming that you've submitted it.
Okay.
And that you're scheduled. So I do want to point out that, like, again, it can be anybody that's in. So for example, Cap Metro. I'm not sure. Last time I looked at that spreadsheet, they put a spreadsheet up online that's maintained every month, It can be anybody in the agency, as long as they have that certification currently. But I would recommend if you're going to be managing a project, you're going to benefit from going to this process. But you just have to be scheduled for it if you don't have anybody in the agency that's currently certified. So.
Okay. My second question is for the project location information.
Mhm.
So the limits from, to, and at, are those supposed to be addresses, or can we notify, or can we note like areas like Cap Metro service area, Travis County? What kind of information do you want for those fields?
That's a good question. So there's flexibility there. Obviously, the roadway limits to, from, and at are very specific to roadway projects. But if you have a project that has multiple locations or is going to take place throughout an entire service area, you can put that in there. You can put various if you want to. Um, and then if you have multiple locations, the heavy lifting is going to be the attachments. So my recommendation would probably be just put various in there, and then put the actual, there should be a list in your attachments of all the specific locations of like if you're going to have multiple locations for your project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Ryan, I have a clarification question regarding the resolutions that you're requesting.
Mhm.
So, in the past, at least in San Marcos, we typically don't do an AFA before the project is approved or by TxDOT and the grant is approved. So, will just a general resolution that says the city of San Marcos supports this project up to a certain amount, will that suffice, or do you actually need an AFA?
Don't need an AFA. I think the resolution you just pointed out would suffice. Like, the whole thing is just knowing that, the local government not only has the funds, but is committed to, once it's awarded, they're committed to spending those funds on that project. So yeah, you don't need an AFA. One thing I would recommend, and I think I'm going to thank Kathy for bringing this up, is that if you're awarded, oftentimes you have to go back to council for another resolution saying, permission to enter into an AFA. I would recommend, if you haven't done your resolution yet, slipping that language in there saying, if we are awarded, we're authorizing staff to enter into an AFA with TxDOT just to streamline that process a little bit. You don't have to, but I think somebody had brought that up, I think at the workshop, and that was a good recommendation from Kathy Stevens. So thank you, Kathy.
Okay. And what is the deadline that you said we need to submit that resolution by? Was
So
it February
yeah,
10th?
if you're not submitting it with your actual application, February 20th. Where was that? Right there. Yeah, February 20th. So
All
just
right.
email it to the funding@campotexas.org and provide that draft resolution in the materials.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Hey, good morning, Jacob.
Hey, Ryan. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks again for putting on all these information sessions. It's been incredibly helpful to us throughout the process of, developing applications. And I know it was an incredible amount of work for you. So thanks to you and your team. I had a question about the actual mechanism of submitting the applications themselves. So two questions really. Is there going to be a way for us to get a receipt of or see what was actually submitted? Like, will there be a record of that we can download so that we can present that to our client? And then the second question is, if we're submitting multiple applications for this round, is there a way to save multiple applications and have multiple saved at the same time?
I mean, you can certainly save as many applications as you started. Yeah, the database does not have any data limitations. We've got a huge database. So as far as confirmation, like, you're not going to receive a copy of it. I'll check with our developers. You will receive a confirmation email that it has been submitted and committed, because the way our database is set up, it's basically a lockbox that not even us as reviewers we can view everything, but we can't touch anything. And what we can do is I can always provide, like, on the back end, either screenshots or like a thing like that. and I'll see if there's like a print version, print ability that they can add. But currently, you'll get a confirmation email, and then it just shows up in our database.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, and we'll just do our due diligence and try to take screenshots as best we can.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I have access to it on the back end. So if you have any, questions, if you're unsure and definitely check, because I know last time a lot of the confirmation emails went to spam. But it's going to go to the email address of whoever is, I think it's the project manager,
Okay.
in the application itself. That's the address that it's going to use. So if that's not you, if it's somebody else, it's going to go to them.
Okay.
So just make sure that that's, you check with them first too. So, but happy to help on the back end. I mean, yeah, they don't disappear. It's a very secure system. And yeah, but I'll check on that. Because I know some systems will send you a copy of your own application,
Okay.
with your confirmation. I'll check and see if we can add that. So,
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
thanks. Hey, Charlie. What? There's two Charlies on here.
Hey, Ryan. Real quick, and I was on late, so this may have already been asked, but can a co-sponsor who's a nonprofit submit the application for the sponsor through their, email? Is there any problem with that?
No, I don't see a problem. I don't really care who submits it as long as they, are doing it on your behalf and all of that. That should be fine if they're doing. And depends on
Okay.
who the lead sponsor. I mean, if they're submitting it, but you're the lead sponsor,
Yes.
yeah, that's a good question. And the confirmation email should go to whoever the project manager is on the sponsor side. So you would get the confirmation. I honestly, I don't care how it gets in the system. What
Okay.
I'm afraid of is like people submitting on behalf of local governments or whatever, and they don't have permission to do that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we'll
Yeah,
cross that bridge.
that's not the case. So, okay, that sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't expect that to be an issue, but you never know. But yeah, no, I'd be fine with that, honestly.
Okay.
So,
And I do have one more federal functional classification.
mhm.
So we're doing some corridor studies, and basically they start out where we meet the federal functional classification on the beginning segment, but as we're going down the corridor, we're looking at areas where the arterial doesn't exist, so there's no federal functional classification, but we do want to keep studying down that corridor.
Mhm.
And then as we go further, we might hit a local road that hasn't met that functional classification at this time, but we believe it would in the future. Are you going to be holding that strictly? Well, you have to, this corridor has to be what's federally classified at this time, or we can make the case that we believe in the future, and that's why we're looking at the corridor, that it would meet that federal functional classification in the future.
If it's a study, so
Right.
that yeah, if
It
it's a
is.
study, then I don't functional classification is not going to be an issue. So
Okay.
that was one. So like it's construction projects where that FC is going to become an issue. I have requested FHWA clarification on that. In my experience, and we've never had an issue. Like you can study whatever you need to study transportation wise. So functional class is not going to be an issue for that.
Okay. Perfect.
And I need to check on engineering. I don't think that's good. On the engineering,
No,
I'm
this
not quite sure because that's project specific development, and I think functional class will start to become an issue at that point. But planning functional class, because yeah, I mean, you know, obviously like greenfield projects that don't even exist yet, you're still studying those things. So yeah.
Yep. That's exactly that. Okay. Thank you for that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a good question. Mhm. I know we're getting close to time, so just kind of final wrap up things. One, I want to say thank y'all all for taking the time this morning. I know y'all have heard me talk a lot, and I wouldn't want to be subjected to this accent for hours on end either. But I do want to say thank y'all so much for the work. I know these applications are a lot of work, both on your end and on our end, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, we're talking again hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in the region. We want to make sure we get it right and do our due diligence. And it's about accountability and making sure that we're doing the best we can. And that takes all of us. I had a slide in here about the kind of a kumbaya slide where we are literally all in this together. Campo has a role, TxDOT has a role, FHWA has a role, but I'd say by and large, the sponsors are the heavy lifters in this process. This is just the beginning. So if your project does get awarded, you have a lot more work to do. And it's all about making the region better. And I think it's a tough job and it's always messy. But I just want to say thank y'all for taking the time and look forward to your applications. I hope they're all amazing and I don't have to, none of them have any kind of readiness issues or anything like that. And that we are struggling, we're having to pick, between nothing but really good projects and make very difficult decisions because they're all good decisions. That is my hope. And anyways, thank you all for your time. So this is the last information session. We have 2.5 weeks. I do want to point out if you have any other questions, like today's the last day to get in questions with a guaranteed response. My time is going to be very limited over the next 2.5 weeks, so please get those in. After that, I will still be trying to answer as many emails as possible, but I'm out most of next week, and then we have a week after that. So please just get your questions in today. Hopefully we don't have any, and I've answered every single one, but again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to your applications on January 30th. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks.
Thank